Hi there, and welcome to APA Citation Basics. This short tutorial will take you through the basic elements of citing your research sources in APA style. Let's start with the basic question. Why do we use research? You might answer, because my professor told me to use 5 sources. And if that's how you answer this question, then all you probably give your professor is a bunch of quotations strung together. And that's not really a research paper of any kind. Think about the bigger question. Why does your professor want you to use those 5 sources? And here is the right answer. Because he wants you to support the argument or claim that you have staked in your thesis sentence. Research is not there to be your argument. It's there to support your argument. Use the materials you find in books and journals as evidence to support your conclusions. And don't forget, you must always give credit to those sources that provide evidence by including in-text citations. So let's talk about some of the terms of the trade. Do you know the difference between summary and paraphrase? Let's start with summary. When you're discussing your research, you might need to summarize certain elements of it, maybe whole paragraphs or even the whole argument presented in that particular source. That means you condense the information into a shorter form so that you can give your audience some context and better make your point. So you're summarizing it, making it shorter. Paraphrasing is a little bit different. When you paraphrase, you're putting somebody else's ideas into your own words. And I'm hitting that hard. Use your own words to do this. When using research sources, paraphrasing is better suited to summing up your source's point about a topic you're exploring, and more often it's more effective than always quoting word for word. You want to change it up, and actually if you're doing APA kinds of papers, your professor probably wants you to avoid quotations and paraphrase the arguments as much as possible. But watch out. Don't just replace words with synonyms. That's still plagiarism. Really take the time to explain the point in your own words. And now we come down to quotations. And when it comes to unintended plagiarism, the most common mistake occurs when a student uses word-for-word information from the text. They often don't understand that there's an extra step involved in quoting information word for word from a source. It is not enough to include a citation. You have to indicate that you are using somebody else's words by putting quotation marks around them. Let's take a look at this example. Let's say I really like the way this author described this point. So I'm going to use this passage word for word. I put it in my paper, I add a signal phrase and incorporate it just like this with a citation and everything. But let's take a closer look. This is how I incorporated the information into my paper, but notice something very important. I have used quotation marks around the words that I took directly from the source. And I've included the source information in parentheses at the end of the sentence. This is called a parenthetical citation, and this is how you cite information. Now, look at the same exact sentence again. This is word for word exactly identical. It has the same citation at the end of it. But in this case, we have not used quotation marks. That's all it takes. This is plagiarism because we have borrowed those words identically from the actual article, but not indicated that. So these are the basic tools for citing research: quotation marks and parentheses. Anything in your paper that does not have quotation marks around it is assumed to be your original work, your own words. And if there is no clear source for your information, either within the sentence itself or in a parenthetical citation at the end of it, or even in the sentence before it, it's assumed to be your idea. Make sure that it is. We need to hit this one more time. It's important. If there are no quotation marks or parentheses and you have not stated your source anywhere in the sentence, you're telling your audience that you wrote it and you thought it. So, what is an in-text citation anyway? Let's take a look at this thing and break it down. This is where you give your source credit in the body of your paper, either as a grammatical part of the sentence or in a parenthetical citation, or sometimes both. It is part of your written paper, not part of your reference page. And whether you use a quotation or paraphrased material, you must cite the source that gave you that information. For example, if we look at this example, the names of the authors appear as the subject of the sentence, and the date of publication appears in parentheses right next to their names. The page number where this quotation can be found is given in the parenthetical citation at the end of the sentence. So we have all the information we need there. But let's break it down now. I have two examples here. One uses quoted material and the other has paraphrased the information. Either way, you need to give us specific information about the source when you cite it. First, you need the last name of the authors. Last name only. We don't need their initials or anything else. Next, you need to be sure you have the year of publication somewhere. Notice that in the beginning, when you use it as a subject of the sentence, you're using your authors that way, you'll put the year in parentheses right next to the name. And finally, if you're using a specific fact or specific information, you'll include a page number. Remember, at the very least, you must give your reader the name of your source and the date of publication. And it's got to be either as part of the sentence or in the parenthetical citation. If you've worked the name of your author into the body of your sentence, the date must appear in parentheses next to the author's name. Don't expect your research to speak for itself. Whether you paraphrase or quote your source, use a signal phrase or verb to introduce it. This example uses a signal phrase, according to Lyons and Fitzgerald, and see how easy that flows right into your sentence? Or you can use a signal verb. In this case, Lyons and Fitzgerald argue. And see, these work that information into your sentence without just leaving a quotation hanging there by itself. According to is an easy and effective way to introduce source material, but you don't want to start every sentence that way. Change it up with a variety of signal phrases like these. If an author is neutral, try some of these. Maybe he comments or explains or illustrates something. If it's a somewhat controversial point, maybe your author argues or claims or contends something. And if it's just something he concluded from his research, you could simply say he concluded or predicted or proposes. Now, one question I get is, when do you use the present tense and when do you use the past tense? It can be a little confusing, but in most situations it works out this way. When you're referring to what an author says or concludes about a topic, use the present tense. If you're referring to information that's, part of the clinical study, if it's an event, something that happened in the past, then use the past tense. In this case, in their study, they found this information. So that's a past event. Now, make sure your audience knows which citation belongs to which sentence. When you're citing source information for a particular sentence, the period comes after the parenthetical citation. In this example, we've already presented the names of the authors and the publication date as a grammatical part of the sentence, but we need to include the page number. Since we're quoting the material, we want to close our quotation marks first. Then we put the parenthetical citation with the page number information in it. And then we put the period at the end of the sentence. That way we know all that information belongs with this sentence. Let's take a look at another example. In this case, we're quoting material, but we've not shared any actual source information as a grammatical part of the sentence, so we need to put all of it in the parenthetical citation at the end. Just as in the last example, we close our quotation marks first. Then we include our publication information in the parentheses at the end of the sentence. Notice we've separated each part of that parenthetical citation with a comma. And then we add the period at the end. Information that is paraphrased still needs proper citation. So in this example, we've included the author's and publication date as a grammatical part of the sentence. It's actually the subject of the sentence. But we still need a page number because the information is pretty specific. So since it's paraphrased material, we don't need any quotation marks here. So we just skip that part. And we go straight to the parenthetical citation where we put our page number in parentheses. And then we add our period. See, that's paraphrased material, but we still have to cite it. If you're paraphrasing information and you haven't identified your source in the body of your sentence, you need to put that information in the parenthetical citation at the end. Notice again, each element is separated by a comma. You'll also notice that the list of authors has been abbreviated. The first time you introduce the authors, include all of their names, up to 5. Then you can abbreviate the list with the Latin "et al." for subsequent references. If you have 6 or more authors, you can abbreviate right from the start. Once you've closed your parenthetical citation, then you can add the period. And finally, when you're simply making a general statement about your source, you don't need a page number. But be sure you include the author and year as a grammatical part of the sentence, or you could include it in a parenthetical citation at the end of the sentence. But all that information needs to be there. If you get called for plagiarism, you've probably committed the #1 mistake to get there: failure to cite as you write. I've had students bring me a paper without a single quotation mark or parenthetical citation on it, and they say, "I'm going to go back later and put that information in." This will cost you dearly. No matter how much you think you're going to get it all, you will miss something. And when you got the information right there in front of you while you're writing the paper, why not include it? If you don't, you're making twice the work for yourself. So remember to always cite as you write. Some general pieces of advice. First, use quotations sparingly. And when you do paraphrase, don't just replace a few words with synonyms. Truly put it in your own words. And make sure that you understand the source material you're using. If you're having trouble putting it in your own words because you don't understand it well, then it's kind of hard for you to use it to support your argument. So maybe you better find another source that is easier to understand. After you introduce source material, make sure you comment on it. Don't just leave it hanging. Tell us why it's relevant to your thesis or elaborate on it further. And introduce your source material in a variety of ways. Make sure your sources are credible and scholarly. Here's some things to avoid. Avoid personal websites and blogs. Those are opinions. They're not necessarily scholarly. And be careful with school websites. Just because it ends in .edu, it may not be scholarly. If it's created by a noted professor, you might be able to use that information. And watch out for sites like sweet101.com, ask.com, answer.com, ehow.com, those kinds of things, because we don't know the people answering those questions. They may not be very respected in their field. They might be, but they might not be. And watch out for things like 123helpme.com or other websites that are really there only for the purpose of generating essays. In other words, cheating rather than doing actual research. Wikipedia is fine for general background information, and it can sometimes help you get started, but don't use it as a source in your paper because it can be edited by anybody. However, if you go down to the bottom of that page, you often see the references that people have used to cite information on that page. So go directly to one of those references, and maybe you could use that as a source. You do want to be able to use sources like online scholarly journals and publications, and often you can get those from database services like Galileo, EBSCOhost, or ERIC. You could also look at recognized online newspapers like the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, especially if they're a paper that also has a print presence as well as their online presence. And established professional organizations like the APA or the NCTE are usually good sources to use. If you need more information, check out some of these websites. Purdue's Online Writing Lab is really excellent and has a style guide for APA that's quick and easy to understand. The APA website is also good. Go to the quick link styles if you need specific help there. And Bedford St. Martin's Press also has a nice page on how to use APA information correctly.